Chapter 5. At Heraklion, the northern port of Crete, I found a fisherman willing to take me by boat to Athens. Once aboard, I sat apart to gaze into the sea. My mind tossed like the waves. I could not fathom what the days ahead would bring. Here I was, 19 years old, and I had never even met a person from India. Aside from knowing that India lay to the east, I had no real idea where it was or how far. I didn't even have a map. According to what I had learned in school, India was a sprawling mass of poverty, disease, overpopulation, and snake charmers. Later, while searching for clues that might unravel life's deepest mysteries, I learned that many regarded it as the land of religion, a place of yogis, and a great holy people. Would I live to meet these rishis? And not as a tourist or sightseer, but as a seeker of truth? Once back in Athens, I found myself in an avalanche of negativity. To get to India, I learned I had to pass through Turkey. Travelers who had been to Turkey warned me about Istanbul. The Istanbul black market is bloodthirsty. They'll promise you a high price for a blood donation, but in reality they'll tie you down, drain all the blood from your body, then throw your corpse into the Black Sea. Another chimed in, the ghettos of Istanbul are havens for criminals so vicious they'll think nothing of killing you for a lira. Determined to go, I stopped my ears against these grisly tales. At the youth hostel, I inquired about the overland route to India. Once again, a group of Europeans gathered around to dissuade me. Don't you read the papers? Are you mad? Someone else shook an English newspaper in my face. Turkey stricken by cholera epidemic, the headline read. You can't reach India without traveling across Turkey. Yes, Turkey was being ravaged by an epidemic of cholera. It was the news all over Europe. And to think I wanted to hitchhike across that country. Maybe I was mad. Among these doomsayers, I met two young men who, like me, intended to travel overland to India. Jeff, an American from San Diego, was in his early 20s, tall and athletically built with a square jaw and sturdy nose. His blonde hair, neatly parted on the side, reached almost to his shoulders, and his blue eyes peered from behind black-rimmed spectacles. Although his features were rugged, he was a peace-loving soul. Like me, he was traveling to India on a spiritual search. Unassuming and fun-loving, he was one of the most likable people I had ever encountered. Ramsey, an Australian with a ruddy complexion and rust-colored hair, in his mid-30s, was a seasoned traveler. Although streetwise and tough, he too was a gentle soul, having already hitchhiked across Europe and Asia. He had maturity and wisdom that we lacked. Although I introduced myself as Richard, the band of travelers was tight enough that I was already known as Monk, and that's what Jeff and Ramsey called me. Among us, only Jeff had any money. Breaking into a huge smile, he said, "Hey guys, there ain't much here, but whatever I have is yours." He swung his arm into his backpack and pulled out some bread, sesame butter, spinach, tomatoes, olives, and feta cheese. With the excitement of an overgrown child, he prepared a delicious feast for us and served it out into 3 equal portions. Sinking his teeth into the sandwich, he took a huge bite and, chewing, said, "After this, we'll have to really rough it, guys. All right?" Ramsey and I nodded, savoring the sandwiches. It was there in the lobby of the youth hostel that the three of us solemnized our pact to traverse the overland trail to India. We went to the Turkish embassy to see if the borders were closed. "Borders open," they boasted. We returned the next day to pick up our visas. To reach Turkey, we hitchhiked north up the coast of Greece to the biblical city of Thessalonica, and then east to Kipi, the northeastern point in Greece. Days went by without a single ride. Still, we managed to grow closer to the border, which was the bridge between Europe and Asia, and the major gateway to Europe for smugglers of cannabis and heroin from the Middle East and Southeast Asia. The border post sat far from any town. We walked for hours to a desolate, dusty outpost where the road ended. A foreboding steel fence blocked our path. Topped by swirls of barbed wire, it stretched as far as my eyes could see. Greek soldiers stood in front, armed with automatic weapons. Approaching a nearby soldier, Ramsey asked, "Where is immigration?" The soldier pointed to a simple shack near the wall of fencing. No one was there, and evening was approaching. Now what? We had already resolved to press ahead. Even so, the only responses to our repeated inquiries were indifference, irritation, and incomprehension. Finally, one young soldier who had been watching us disappeared. A few moments later, the Greek immigration official came out from a tea stall that until then we had not noticed. He was a stout, round-bellied man with a thick mustache, and his military shirt looked to be a size too small for him. Wiping the corner of his mouth with a towel, he handed it to the young informant and peered at us. "What do you want?" he asked. Ramsey coolly responded, "We want to cross the border to Turkey." The round-bellied man looked at us in disbelief. "Not possible," he said. "Borders are closed. Cholera is raging like fire in Turkey. No sane man will go there now." "But the embassy told us it was open," Jeff blurted out. "We want to—" "Do you know what a cholera epidemic is?" the official said, his face bristling with anger. "If I let you through that gate, you cannot return. This border is closed from entrance." He pointed east toward the darkening sky. "Out there is a no man's land." Narrowing his eyes, he added, "Do you know what you'll find there? A wilderness filled with poisonous snakes and hungry wolves. A desert with no food or water." Before we could say another word, Jeff cut in. "But why would the embassy in Athens tell us it's open? We already paid and were promised entry." The veins of the officer's neck bulged. Pointing his finger, he shouted, "The Turkish border is closed. If you walk through that gate, you will never return. Do you hear me? I advise you to go back to where you came from. I'm leaving in 2 minutes. Make up your mind now." The sun was about to set. We had struggled for days to reach that border. Hastily, we blurted out, "We'll go to Turkey." Outraged, the man ordered the military to swing open the gate. As we passed through it, he shouted his prediction, "Fools, you'll never return." Soldiers stood with rifles in hand as the steel gate slammed shut behind us. we inched forward. The no man's land was indeed the most desolate place I had ever seen. A deserted wilderness uses a buffer between two inimical countries. The sun was setting. At a distance, I saw a snake slithering across the parched soil. A few leafless trees stood like sentinels, marking our passage. It became darker and darker. Ordinarily, this was a somewhat common passage for travelers. But on that night, thanks to the epidemic and the Greek border being closed, it was utterly deserted. We were especially vulnerable, as it was dark and we were traveling by foot. I noticed the dry bones of some sort of skeleton lying about 30 feet to our left, but dared not to bring this sight to my companion's attention. Anxiety gnawed at my insides. What if the Turkish border really was closed? The embassy told us it was open, but that had been a week ago. Would we be trapped in this no man's land to die? The darkness and the cold intensified. Wolves howled intermittently, piercing the silence, and we crept ahead. I remembered how a shopkeeper in Athens had warned me that this stretch of land was full of unexploded mines buried during the time of the Greek Civil War. Mines that could rip your leg right off, he had said, and plant pieces of your shoe right in the stump. I shuddered and stepped gingerly ahead, praying at every step. None of us dared to speak a word. The 4-kilometer trek through pitch darkness was like a walk through the valley of death. Shivering, I felt hopeless and sick. Just as it seemed that night would never end, a glimmer of light appeared in the distance. Hastening forward, we made out a fence of steel beams topped with barbed wire. In the center, bolted on the gate, was a Turkish flag made out of metal. We quickened our pace. An armed soldier stood guard inside, puffing on a filterless cigarette. Ever cool-headed, Ramsey whispered, "Let me handle this." He drew his passport from his pouch and coughed to draw the attention of the guard. When the guard looked up, Ramsey displayed his passport, pointing to us and then to the grounds beyond. The man was disinterested. He shouted 2 words, "Border closed." "But sir, you have to let us in or we'll die. The Greeks won't let us back." "Border closed." A cloudy vapor burst from his mouth, accentuating the 2 harsh words. With nowhere to go, we felt like prisoners pleading for mercy. But there would be no mercy from this gatekeeper. His entire English vocabulary consisted of 2 words, "Border closed." He crushed the stub of his cigarette under his boot heel and stomped away into the darkness. 20 minutes later, he returned to find us still standing like refugees outside the gate. Gesticulating, he exploded into a litany of banishments. "Border closed! Border closed! Border closed!" I wondered if he might shoot us. Just then, his superior officer came to the scene. Apparently, he had been educated in the same school. Border closed. Silently, we held our ground. Finally, our desperation and unwillingness to turn back convinced the second gatekeeper, and he relented. Corralling us into a wooden shack, he confiscated our belongings, including our passports, money, and even the clothes off our backs, then locked the door and abandoned us. Standing nearly naked in the freezing cold, we wondered if we were any better off than we had been moments before in the no man's land. What now? Had he left us there to die? For about an hour, we stood shivering in our underpants, as much from suspense as from the cold in that makeshift prison. Finally, our jailer returned. He peered into our faces, returned our clothes, stamped our passports, and broke into a smile. "Welcome to the great country of Turkey," he said. Deeply shaken, we crossed over into a whole new world.